What's happening, Reds? This is Jay from the LFC transfer room. So today's video is a versus video. So it's Luis Diaz versus Vinicius Jr. And we'll basically be comparing some stats between the two players. So goals and assists, chances created, dribbling, passing and pressure on the ball. But before we get started on the video, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And also make sure that you like the video if you like it, and make sure you get your comments in with your opinions, because we'd like to know what your thoughts are as well. So before we get into the stats properly, I just want to touch on both players very quickly, last season's stats compared to this season's stats so far, just because of the difference between it. So last season, Luis Diaz scored 6 goals and he got 5 assists. Vinicius Jr. got 3 goals and 3 assists. Now, this season, Diaz has scored 18 goals and has 7 assists. Now, that's obviously across playing for Porto and Liverpool. It's not just for Liverpool or just for Porto. And Vinicius Jr.'s at 17 goals and 10 assists. So if you look at their form this season compared to last, the improvement's staggering. They've both jumped leaps and bounds in comparison to the season before. But I just thought it was worth mentioning to show the rise of both players in just one season. So we'll move on to what most forwards are judged on these days, which is goals and assists, obviously. So we'll be looking at who's got the better goal and assist. So if we start with Luis Diaz gets 0.66 goals per game. And in comparison to Vinicius Jr. gets 0.57 goals per game. Now, if you look at the assist, there obviously isn't too much of a big difference there in terms of goals per game. So over 90 minutes, it means Diaz gets 0.66 goals per game, and it means Vinicius gets 0.57 goals per game. I don't know how you score 0.6 of a goal or 0.5 of a goal, but that's how the stats work. Now, in terms of assists, Luis Diaz gets 2.6 assists per game. 0.26 assists per game, and Vinicius gets 0.33 assists per game. Now, if you put that together, it works out that Luis Diaz gets a goal or assist, gets 0.92 goals and assists per game. So obviously you're combining the two. And Vinicius Diaz gets 0.90 goals and assists per game. Now, that's as tight as you can get. It's 0.2% difference between the two players. So in that round, in terms of actual goals and assists, Luis Diaz wins by 0.2%, which isn't very much at all. It goes to show how closely tied these players are in terms of actual goals and assists. So for the first round, in terms of goals and assists, Luis Diaz gets more goals and assists for the season. So now we'll look at the creativity of both players and how they differ in terms of the creativity. So per game, Luis Diaz creates 4.62 shot creating actions per game. Vinicius Jr. creates 5.69 shot creating actions per game. So what that means is it's an action that Diaz or Vinicius take that leads to a shot on goal. So whether it be a pass, a dribble, anything of that nature that leads to a shot. So in terms of that, Vinicius creates more shot creating actions per game at 5.69 in comparison to Diaz's, which is 4.62. So slightly higher on that one. Now, the other thing to look at in terms of the creativity is dribbles that lead to a attempt on goal. So Luis Diaz creates a shot on goal from dribbling 0.94 times per game in comparison to Vinicius's, which is 0.70 times per game. So Diaz is more effective at dribbling to create a chance on goal compared to Vinicius. So Vinicius creates more shot creating actions, but in terms of dribbling that leads to a shot, Luis Diaz is more effective in that part of the game. So the next thing to look at in the creativity is actions that lead to a goal. So goal creating actions. So whether it be a pass or a dribble that leads to an actual goal, not just a shot on target. So for Luis Diaz, it's 0.38 times per game that he leads to a goal scoring action. Vinicius is 0.84. So obviously Vinicius blew Diaz out the water in terms of the amount of goal creating actions per game, which comes into the stats earlier in terms of assists. Obviously Vinicius has 3 more assists than Diaz, which is probably why he's a little bit higher in terms of the creativity. Now, looking at that stat earlier as well, where it was 0.92 goals and assists per game, that basically means that both players are almost a goal or assist every single game, because they're almost at 1. So looking at that round in terms of creativity, Vinicius edges it quite a lot in comparison to goal creating actions. So in terms of creativity, Vinicius Jr. creates more chances than Luis Diaz. So the next thing we'll look at the shooting stats of both players. So we'll start with Luis Diaz again. So Luis Diaz takes 3.68 shots per game. Out of that, the shots on target is 1.47 per game. So that works out at 40% shots on target percentage, which isn't really that high, to be honest. It's not bad, but it's not great. Now, if we look at Vinicius has roughly 2.71 shots per game, but his shots on target are 1.4 per game. So his shots on target percentage is at 51.9%. So Vinicius has more shots on target than Luis Diaz, and he actually takes less shots per game as well. Now, the next thing to look at, which might be a bit surprising because Vinicius takes more shots than Diaz, is when a shot's on target. So if Diaz is to have a shot and it's on target, he'll score 0.45 of them attempts that are on target. Now Vinicius is at 0.40. So what it basically means is, when there's a shot on target from Diaz or Vinicius, it's actually Diaz that's more likely to score if the shot's on target. So it might sound a little bit crazy, because obviously Vinicius has more shot percentage on target, but out of them, when the ball is actually hit on target, Diaz converts more by 0.5 than Vinicius. So it's very, very fine margins again. If you actually look at the distance of both players as well, where they normally take the shots from, Luis Diaz's average shots are from 16 yards out, and Vinicius is at 15 yards. So it's almost identical where both players are taking shots from, and obviously they do both play the same position. Now, the expected goals per game for both players, so for Diaz it's 0.42 goals per game, and for Vinicius it's 0.44. So it's 0.2 of a difference. These players are so closely matched that it's crazy in terms of goals and assists per game and the expected goals per game. So in terms of the shooting stats, Vinicius edges it in terms of his shots on target percentage, but in terms of effectiveness when the ball's hit on target, it's actually Luis Diaz. So you could probably call that round a tie. Even letting someone win by 0.2% seems a bit harsh. So they're both really, really neck and neck in relation to that stat. So the next thing we'll look at is the passing ability of both players. Now, again, this is a really tight stats between the two. The two players are really well matched, to be honest. So in terms of passing per game, Diaz will attempt 42.3 passes per game in comparison to Vinicius's 43.4. So there's literally 1 pass per game difference between the two on average. So for Diaz, out of 42.3 passes per game, he completes 37.2. Now that's for short passes, medium and long. That's just passing in general. So he comes out at 87.9% successful pass rate. So Vinicius attempts 43.4 passes per game and he completes 36.5% of them passes. So that brings him out at 83.9%. So in terms of overall passing, whether it be short, long, medium, Luis Diaz has a slightly better percentage than Vinicius Jr. Now if you look at the type of passing that they do on average per game, that's where it slightly differs. So in terms of short passing, Diaz attempts 23.1 short passes per game and he completes 21 of them passes. Vinicius does 25.3 short passes per game and he completes 22.6% of them passes. So that brings Diaz out at 91% completion rate for short passing and Vinicius at 89.5%. So it's literally 0.5%, neck and neck again. For medium passes, Diaz will attempt 14.2 per game and he completes 12.5, which gives him 88% completion rate for medium passes. For Vinicius, he attempts 12.4 passes per game, medium passes that is, and he completes 10.7 of them. So again, Diaz at 88% completion, Vinicius at 86.3. So again, there's nothing really in that 1.7%. Now this is where it's slightly different in terms of passing range. This is the only stat where they're quite far apart in relation to passing, because all the others have been so close. So Diaz will attempt 3.3 long passes per game and he completes 2.92, which I think is really high for a forward player. It's obviously midfielders that you'd associate long passing with. Now for Vinicius, he attempts 3.8 long passes per game, so he tries a similar amount of them, but he completes 2.14% of them long passes. So percentage wise, Diaz completes 88.6% of his long passing, which I think is really impressive for a forward player, as I've just mentioned. Now Vinicius is at 69.6%, so there's quite a big difference between them in terms of the long passing ability. Diaz edges that by almost 20%. So obviously that gives us a slight advantage in terms of creating space when Diaz can play a long pass, because it frees up space for another player. Now the other thing worth mentioning in relation to passes is how many passes the player receives under pressure, how they deal with the ball when they're being pressed. So Luis Diaz roughly makes 7 passes per game whilst he's under pressure, and Vinicius makes 5.8 passes whilst he's under pressure, so being pressed by the opposition, under pressure on the ball. The other thing we're looking at in relation to passing is progressive passes, so passes going forward. So Luis Diaz makes 3.87 progressive passes per game in comparison to Vinicius's, which is 3.71 progressive passes in the game. So this is what's getting the clubs forward, getting your team forward up the pitch. So in terms of passing, Luis Diaz is the more effective passer. He's got a better completion rate and he's also got a better distance of passing. So the better passer out of the two players is Luis Diaz. So the last stat we'll look at is defensive actions. Now obviously, with both players being forwards, this isn't defending in terms of heading the ball out your own area. It's pressing, so it's defending from the front line, which is what Liverpool do hugely. It's our game. We press from the front, and that's where your defending starts. So we'll look at the defensive action of both players, but obviously it's a much more forward thinking in terms of defending. So in terms of tackling, Luis Diaz attempts 1.13 tackles per game, and out of them he wins 0.59 of them tackles. Now Vinicius, this actually surprised me, he attempts more tackles than Diaz per game. So Vinicius attempts 1.57 tackles per game and he wins 1.17 of them, which is obviously higher than Diaz. Now the interesting thing in this is where the tackles are actually won. So Luis Diaz wins 0.38% of his tackles in the defensive third of the pitch. Now Vinicius is at 0.80, which shows most of his tackling is actually in his own half rather than in the middle or further up the pitch, which I find surprising given the role that he plays. Now in the middle third, Diaz wins 0.38% of his tackles that he makes in comparison to Vinicius 0.67. Now the interesting part of this is Diaz wins 0.38% of his tackles in the attacking third of the pitch. Now in comparison to Vinicius at 0.10. So Vinicius may commit more tackles and win more tackles, but they're actually in his own half and in the middle of the pitch, where you could argue Diaz is winning the ball in the attacking third of the pitch, which is a much more effective place to obviously win the ball. So much more of Diaz's tackling actually happens in the offensive opposite end of the pitch, whereas Vinicius is doing it more in his own area, which is quite surprising. So the other thing to look at in defensive actions is players going past Diaz or Vinicius. So the amount of dribblers that Diaz tackles are 0.28 tackles per game on a dribbler. And in terms of being dribbled past, he's dribbled past 0.94 times per game. So that gives him a tackling percentage of 30%. He wins 30% of the tackles where someone's trying to dribble past them, and he's dribbled past 0.66 times by a player per game. Now in comparison to Vinicius, he tackles dribblers 0.43 times per game, and he's also dribbled past 1.67 times per game. So it's quite a bit higher than Diaz. It's easier to get past Vinicius than it is to get past Diaz. So it gives him a tackling percentage win rate of 26% when players are trying to dribble past them. And he's dribbled past roughly 1.24 times per game, which is double what Diaz is. So it's easier to dribble past Vinicius than it would be Diaz. Which makes sense in terms of Diaz obviously pressing from the front rather from his own half. Now in terms of pressures on the ball, Luis Diaz will press the ball 15.4 times per game, and out of them 15 presses, he wins 5.57 of them. So that gives him a success rate of 36.2% when Diaz is pressing the ball, which is usually against obviously opposition defenders. Now Vinicius presses the ball more than Luis Diaz. He presses it 18.4 times per game, but his success rate is 5.8 times per game. So his percentage is 27.6%. So that obviously means Diaz is more effective at pressing the ball than Vinicius. Vinicius, again, he may attempt more dribbles, but his success rate is actually less than Diaz because he attempts more. And it's the same with the pressing. He may press more, but he doesn't win the ball as much as Diaz, even though Diaz doesn't press as often as him. So in terms of defensive play, which is offensive defensive play, Luis Diaz, again, takes it. He's got a better tackle rate and he's better at pressing the ball as well and winning it higher up the pitch, which is absolutely massively important for the way that we play. So overall, I think you can agree both players are fantastic. Some of them stats, it's neck and neck. They're both brilliant players, and the great thing is seeing the progression they've managed to make over 1 year, and they're both really young. So they're two exciting players that I think we're going to be able to enjoy watching for many years to come, yeah. And bear in mind, Diaz has only been with us 6 months, so it's scary to think of the improvements he can make. So don't forget to like the video if you like it. Leave your comments on any thoughts that you've got on the video, and obviously most importantly, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. If you are travelling to Paris over the next 2 days, congratulations, you're lucky. Make sure you travel safe, don't do anything stupid, and most importantly, enjoy the game. Up the red men. This is LFC Transfer Room. I'm Jay. Enjoy the game Saturday. Hopefully we're getting number 7.